We need just a couple seconds for the live stream to kick in, Teresa.
It is on. Ready? Ready when you are, Teresa.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our March work session of the D38 Board of Education. This is a hybrid meeting, and I'd like to go ahead and call this meeting to order. Ms. Wood, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Clausen. Mr. Schwartz.
Here.
Ms. Upchurch. Here. Ms. Phillips.
Here. The Board of Education maintains a webpage on lewispalmer.org through which members of the public can find live streaming information and meeting records, as well as presentations and resources, which will be reviewed and discussed during this meeting. Ms. Upchurch, could you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Let's see, we have a number of work session items, and we have a request to move the discussion for the timeline to fill Director District 1 vacancy up to item B1. So we're, if it's okay, Dr. Summers and fellow board members, I'd like to switch item 2 with item 1. Is everybody in concurrence with that?
Everybody's nodding here, Ms. Phillips.
I'm looking nodding. Yes, thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and I want to make sure Mr. Clausen heard that as well.
Yes, that's fine, Ms. Phillips, if you can hear me.
Okay, super. Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. Thank you, Mr. Clausen. Let's go ahead and we're going to discuss the timeline to fill Director District 1 vacancy. I'm just getting, oh, thank you. Okay, so we have a couple, the broad timeline is that we, obviously in filling this vacancy, we need to put out an opening for applications, and that opening will begin with the application starting on March 8th. The legal notice in the Tribune announcing the vacancy stating application information will be available on the website beginning March 8th. As I understand it, Dr. Summers, the application questions as well as requests for 2 to 3 references and a resume are all part of the application. Is that correct?
So that's something I think we just want to make sure we are getting direction from you all on, to the degree you want letters of reference and or resume. Resume is pretty standard. I don't know if you're going to require those letters or just request them. I guess that's one point of consideration. And then the questions themselves as part of the application, I know you want to have a chance to review today as well.
Yeah, we'll review the questions next. I just wanted to get a general idea from other board members as to the references and the resumes. So let's start with Mr. Clausen, if we could.
I don't know if you heard me.
Matt, did you happen to hear that question?
I did not. Can you repeat it, please?
I would like everyone's input on 2 to 3 references and a resume included with the application for a new board member.
I'm sorry, I heard something about references and resumes. Can you fill in the blanks, Ron?
Yeah, I can. Ms. Phillips was wondering if it made sense and wanted board member comments on if it made sense to include in the application process a resume and letters of recommendations for reference.
Yeah, so my preference would be, as one board member, is to have a resume, at least 3 references, and in work history.
And Matt, can you just clarify in references, are you speaking, in my recollection that is in the past, we've had names and phone numbers of references to call, but did you want reference letters or letters of recommendation?
No, just, I apologize if I misspoke. I'm just looking for references, individuals, at least 3 individuals that we could call and ask questions that have a personal and professional relationship with the applicant.
Sure. Ms. Upchurch, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, so my preference is similar to Matt's. I think we should do, for consistency's sake, that our process be similar to, when we went through this, with you, that we do the same process. Which is the 3 references.
Great. Mr. Schwartz?
My goal is to make it the most effective process possible. A reasonable window of time. So the more complete the applications can be, the better. Simple fact of the matter is, you don't know if somebody is a quality asset in addition to the team for a good 3 to 6 months. So anything we can do to vet that and ensure we get someone that is good for the citizens, good for the students, and good for the team would be very valuable.
Thank you all. So, Dr. Summers, do you have what is needed in order to state the application information available from tomorrow on?
Yes, if I could just restate and make sure that we have it clear. We will be requiring a resume, which includes a work history, a list of at least 3 personal/professional references with contact information. And then the questions that I think you all are about to at some point discuss here answered and submitted in order to have a complete application for interested candidates.
That's as I understood it. Other board members, anything else to add?
I have one thought. It may be in the future documentation in the application process. Is there somewhere where we're very crisp and clear on the quantity and quality of time commitment required?
I don't know if you're ready to move into the question part of the application. There is a question that's currently listed that speaks to a time commitment. But to your point, Mr. Schwartz, if you all are directing us to say, here's what you can expect as part of what our typical time commitments involve, that's something that we could certainly add to some context on the application, just some basic abilities to commit to those minimum requirements, if you will.
I'll defer to the team, but in my humble opinion, it'd be extremely valuable to have both sides be crystal clear on the expectation, what it takes to make a contribution in terms of time and quality work.
I think it would work well to put in the, I don't know, the context or leading paragraph that we meet twice a month. We have a work session on Tuesday mornings and a public board meeting on the, well, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's the 3rd Monday or the 4th Monday, however you want to state it, but that would at least give the broad strokes of the time commitment. To Ron's point.
May I supplement that as well?
Yes.
That's exactly why I bring this up. That's just the beginning. Right? For each session we attend, there's usually a 30 to 180 minute prep work and often some work right behind it. You take the president and secretary, for example. There's also a commitment to have an agenda setting meeting, right? And in addition to that, there are voluntary activities for board members that really are not a requirement, but they're highly recommended. They're highly valuable to being impactful because you understand what's happening in the district that you're responsible for. in the school district, not the geographic district. And therefore, I think it's valuable if we lay that out for those who have interest and passion in helping us be successful, so that there's a crisp understanding on both sides that it's not insignificant, it's extremely rewarding and extremely important for the future of the next generation.
You know, Ron, I concur with that. You know, being on the board for a little bit, I can tell you there's times that I spend a lot more time than others. So perhaps what we do is as was outlined, is we outline the minimum mandatory meetings and responsibilities, and we just put an additional sentence or perhaps paragraph stating that, you know, depending upon time availability, there's plenty of opportunities for other activities that can significantly increase the time commitment. But you know, if we have a good professional that has a pretty busy personal life, but they're going to be a great asset to the board, I don't want them to review something that will be a deterrent from considering being appointed.
If I can offer another paraphrase of what I'm hearing, and then also how this will land into the structure of the application. We envision a Google form that has the questions, again, that you all will still let us know which ones you want and which ones you may want to edit. The Google form allows for an introduction that can say the Board of Education is seeking applicants for this Director 1 position. Minimum eligibility criteria includes being a resident within District 1. Please see the map here to ensure that your address lives within those boundaries. 2, here's what you can expect in being a board member, including what the major responsibilities are, as well as the summary of the time commitment. And that can precede the questions that the candidates actually then move into as they're working through the form. There's only one other thing I want to make sure to mention, and that is, I think it's important that our not only the candidates, potential candidates, but the community at large is aware that this is a seat that is effective from April upon appointment through November. And based on the timing of Mr. Taylor's resignation, the November election will have this seat up for a 2-year term election. And I think that's just probably another dynamic that we want to make sure people are aware of. And that will actually coincide, as you all know, with an election for 3 other seats that are 4-year terms. So those are all, I know that's a lot of information. I think we can condense that in a nice, succinct couple of paragraphs and use that as the lead into the application itself.
Yeah, I would second that. It's really, I just think it's really important that people know what they're getting themselves into. And to Matt's point, what the minimum requirements are to do a quality job, and then what the ancillary opportunities are.
Yeah, easy for us to compile all that and have it ready to go. Is there anything more?
So I think.
Oh, go
If I
ahead.
may, Can I share my opinion? I concur. And I think at least a minute showing the minimum requirement. But also recognizing that this position is what you make of it. It is what you put into it. So I think there's a minimum time commitment, and I think we all put in more than the minimum time commitment. And I think that that's important to share that, but also recognizing that, you know, if I'm putting 30 to 40 hours a week into this position, that doesn't mean that everybody else is, or that it's a requirement.
We are happy to, based on everything that's been shared, have a solid draft of what that introduction section will look like. Just so I feel a sense of confidence from you all that summary states very clearly what you all are expecting. What I volunteer is that we can get a draft of that to you all by early this afternoon. Have a chance to review, send any edits our way. Because again, in order to keep with our timeline, we'd really like to have this launched no later than tomorrow as we go into March 8th. And then have that application window open through the end of this month, consistent with the timeline that we've suggested through March 31st.
I think that will work well, considering we've just talked at length about the introductory statement on the application. I think it would be really good for all of us to see that draft this afternoon, especially before it's published.
We will get that to you expeditiously.
Okay, and then I want to segue here into the application questions and ask the other board members if there's any application question edits they would prefer and or any sequencing differences if you want questions in a different order. So I'll start with, again, Mr. Clausen.
I don't have any edits, thank you.
Mr. Schwartz
Also no edits, thank you.
and Ms. Upchurch with regarding the application questions on the screen.
The questions, no, I have no edits. I think they're good questions.
Okay, so we'll use those questions as they are here unedited in this sequence, please.
Thank you to those who spent the time and the effort to prepare.
Maybe it was a grab in the past.
It was, but there were a couple of ads as well, so we appreciate that.
Yeah.
This is our most recent and updated.
I do have, are we discussing the timeline now?
Yes, so I was gonna ask Mr. Belcher, thank you. He's right in sync with me. So yeah, I want to just go through this timeline so that it's public as well. So beginning tomorrow, the legal notice in the Tribune announcing the vacancy, stating the application information, which we just discussed. And all of that will be available on the website beginning tomorrow. And then forwarding to March 15th, a second legal notice in the Tribune. Dr. Summers, can you, if determined to be necessary, how will we know if it's necessary?
That was simply if you all decide you would like an ad to run second date, it could run March 15th.
Did you hear that, Ms. Phillips?
I did hear that. Yeah, so I'd like, I think the more notice we have out, the better, but I'd like to hear from fellow board members because we won't be meeting before March 15th, so we need to decide that today. Mr. Clausen, do you have a thought on that second notice in the Tribune?
I have no objections to the second notice.
Mr. Schwartz
Also none, thank you.
and Ms. Upchurch?
No objection.
Okay, let's go ahead and
Sounds like Matt.
Yeah, one question I have for you, Ms. Phillips, is I apologize, I don't have a March 15th meeting on the calendar. Is it in the morning or the evening?
yeah, just to clarify, there's no meeting on the 15th. It was just a question as to whether we were going to put a second legal notice in the Tribune for the open position.
All right, I apologize.
No worries.
My cell phone coverage is very spotty. I'm quite frankly having a very difficult time here.
I appreciate you being here as best you can. Thank you. So further going down the timeline further, March 20th is our Board of Education regular meeting. There will be no aspect of the application or interview process at that meeting. We'll just run a regular agenda, as I understand. March 31st at noon is the last day to submit applications, no exceptions. And March 31st in the afternoon, we will review all of the applications, and if I'm assuming if they have not met the requirements, then they will be moved on to an interview slot, which we will interview tentatively. Right now, we're planning to set up those interviews for April 4th. I would like to know from each board member if that date and will work for them in terms of a block of time to set up interview slots. So Mr. Schwartz, does April 4th work for you?
Yes,
Ms. Upchurch, does April 4th work for you for conducting interviews?
Yes, April 4th works, but can we go up to March 31st?
Yes.
So the review of applications and selection of interviewees. Can you describe that a little bit more of what that entails? Between.
Sure, I think it's just a matter of a couple of us looking at the applications as they've been submitted and making sure we have all of the material to proceed to an interview. If something were missing, we need to either contact that applicant to see if they can, fulfill on what the requirements, or perhaps maybe not set up an interview if it's not complete. Dr. Summers, did you have any other thoughts on that process?
Sure, yeah, what I can add to it is with the applications as they've been submitted, we'll have the ability to have, and it's probably best in hard copy, to be able to share with, I would envision at least one, if not two board members to be part of that, that initial review. I think given the strict expectations that you all are, I don't know if I can want to call them strict, but a high level of expectation. I would imagine that all of our applicants will meet that threshold. And I would imagine that every applicant who is eligible or qualified, you would want to bring forward for an interview without unnecessarily screening anyone out at that point in time. Now, if somebody submitted something and it was incomplete, or for some reason they didn't meet some other criteria, then I think you have the ability to see that displayed in a way that makes it clear that candidate just is not going to move forward because they are not meeting some element of the requirements of that application.
Like a background check.
No, I don't. We're not going to necessarily background check the board members or the board applicants through this process. But if somebody turned in an application and no questions were answered, or you expected a resume, there was no resume, or they applied but they don't live within the boundaries of District 1, those would be some examples that would come to my mind that would render them not meeting the threshold that you've identified. Other than those types of examples, I would imagine anyone who is meeting those thresholds, you would want to bring forward and you want to invite. So you just don't know how many you're going to have yet, which is why I think making sure that you have enough of a chunk of time, given the parameters that you're trying to establish for that interview date, are going to be important to stay somewhat flexible on.
Yeah, I guess when.
Kickbacks there, first, people that maybe not be as familiar with Google Docs, I wonder if there'd be some wisdom and if there's a application submitted and it's incomplete, just to have Ms. Woods contact them and let them know it's incomplete. Secondly, we have to be very careful right off the bat to make sure that the respective candidate lives in District 1. When I was appointed, there was actually someone else initially appointed, and they realized after she was appointed that she didn't live in District number 5. So I would prefer not having to deal with those issues. So perhaps we could instruct Ms. Wood to thoroughly go through that information, double and triple check it before we move forward with the application process for that prospective individual.
Yeah, Mr. Clausen, those are excellent points, and we can absolutely work in that fashion. The other thing I will add is with the way that we're able to view, specifically Ms. Wood is able to view the applications as they're coming forth. If for some reason somebody has submitted an application that has some missing or incomplete information, there's nothing that prevents us from reaching out to say, hey, we just want to remind you, this is when the deadline is. Is there any assistance that we can provide? What can we do to help you in facilitating that process? Just so that we're being good, just have good customer service for those individuals that are applying. So we can absolutely make those efforts throughout every stage of this process.
Perfect. And the reason I was asking the question was, I guess background check isn't the right word I was looking for the qualification of, do they live in the district, making sure they don't have felony, the same requirements that are required of us to be able to run for a position. That's what I was getting at.
I can very easily do that each step of the way through.
So if I may just point of clarification for everybody. Two things. One is, what is the method that we use that's legal and correct to validate where somebody lives?
You want to talk about that process?
I will go to the county assessor's first my first option is to go to the county assessor's website and verify their address from what they reported on their application. And then I will look at our director district boundary map and make sure that address resides within there. I also will verify their voter registration with the county, and I have needs to do a quick felony check for child abuse.
Okay, yeah, so it's not a felony, it is child-related felony conviction.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
Just to be clear.
Okay, so I'm gonna loop back to April 4th. I want to make sure that every board member is available on April 4th for interviews. Let's just review. Mr. Schwartz and Miss Upchurch, I heard that you are available, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and Mr. Clausen, do you know if you might be available on April 4th for a block of time up until noon to conduct interviews?
Currently I'm available from 8 AM to 10:30 PM. That's the time that I usually block out for board meetings. Just to be clear, are you now asking to expand that?
Yeah, I think we would want 8 AM until about noon, 12 o'clock noon.
Okay. Is there any way that we could have a very truncated board meeting from 8 to 3 and then do it after that?
I'm getting some broken audio, so if anybody heard Mr. Clausen's question, feel
Yeah,
free to
his,
answer.
his request was that we have a shortened board meeting. And maybe from 8 to 8:30 and begin the interviews early. To provide him an opportunity to meet his professional commitments likely.
Dr. Summers, can you speak to that in terms of a work session agenda on the 4th? I don't have a work session agenda for the 4th in front of me at the moment, but
Yeah, currently, we don't necessarily have a long list of items. In fact, I'd be hard pressed to name the specific item or items that I know we'll need to cover as part of that work session. I think you can certainly, and we can work through the next couple of weeks to whatever we have potentially planned for the 4th, to make sure that the interviews take priority over any of those items. So,
and to that point, is it possible to flip the schedule so that we would start interviews at 8 AM?
we can, yeah, absolutely. We can be as flexible as you all need us to be.
I'd like to propose that we do that. To Mr. Clausen's point, that we start interviews at 8 AM and we make sure that that's the priority that day and then move into a work session. But I'd like to hear from the others as to considerations from, so Mr. Schwartz, what are your thoughts?
I don't see, no, everybody in this room is nodding yes.
Consider
Okay,
it.
so to Mr. Clausen's point, let's align interviews at 8 AM and then followed by an abbreviated work session.
Roger that.
Okay, and then just working through the timeline, I'm just gonna jump to April 17th because at that meeting, the public board meeting, we will announce the new director and, well, actually, no, we will have already announced the new director. So that director will be taking the oath of office, which means that working backward within the 10 days prior to that, we will need to set up a special meeting to appoint the new director. And I suggest we don't set that date yet because obviously it'll be dependent on the availability of that person. But just to let my other board members know, we will need to coordinate a date within 10 days prior to the 17th to announce and appoint the new director. Or the new director of District 1, but and then on April 17th, we will also after the oath of office, we will reorganize the board officers. I know I just said that in sort of a convoluted way, so let me know if you need any points of clarification. Mr. Schwartz?
None, thank you. It was clear.
Ms. Upchurch?
No, that was clear. My request is there an opportunity for the candidates after we've interviewed them, perhaps on the same day of the April 4th date, for community engagement with the candidates?
can you give me an idea of what you mean by community engagement?
Just an opportunity for a meet and greet. Obviously, we as the board are the ones that will make that vote at a point, but having the opportunity for our staff and our general public to shake hands and learn who the candidates are. Just as part of that open dialogue. So that was one thing I was curious about. And then the process for when we interview, when will we, my recommendation is that we use a process similar to when we interviewed, when we filled this position before we interviewed you, that we use that same process.
What was that process?
So we each as board members asked a couple questions. So the candidates, Mr. Clausen, correct me if I'm wrong, and Teresa, you would remember also, did you guys get to sit in on each other's interviews or did we bring you in one at a time?
We were brought in one at a time. I do remember staying after my interview and sitting,
And
But I
watching
think
the deliberation?
pardon me.
You watched the deliberation?
Yeah. And then I think after that, I did have a chance to shake everybody's hand. So there was some engagement there. It was brief, but I'd like to hear more from the others about your community engagement thought, Tiffany. So Mr. Schwartz and Mr. Clausen, your thoughts on community engagement with the candidates?
Feel free. I know you're on a shorter time frame.
Community engagements, I have absolutely no objection to that. I guess, you know, what's the avenue for the community to contact the board members or board member to share their feedback or input regarding a candidate? I guess the same would hold true for the district employees. So, you know, the question is for them to just interact. I don't have a problem with that, but once again, if the intent is for them to interact with the prospective candidates, then get that information back to us. We need to figure out what that looks like and who the information is provided to.
Do you want me to answer now or do you want to?
Yeah,
Okay.
Ms. Upchurch, you go ahead.
So when I think of this, I think any other way that our community can engage with us, they can send an email, they can reach out. And obviously the ultimate decision lies with the four of us. But just that engagement in that, I think it opens up an opportunity for dialogue. And it opens up an opportunity for our community to get to know who's interested in the board and serving them on this board. So I would leave that feedback up to anybody who wants to share their feedback. And the means to share that feedback up to them as well.
Mr. Schwartz?
Mr. Clausen succinctly said most of what was on my mind. Anytime we have a chance to engage our stakeholders and customers in someone that represents them is pretty valuable. My concern is adding significant complexity in a short time frame. So we would have to be pretty succinct on how we would get feedback in that scenario. But that would be the one thing I would caution us to. We would have to have a pretty crisp mechanism. And of course, conversely, if the public in a worst case scenario felt that we got it wrong, they would fix it in November.
That's true.
No, that's the reality,
Yeah.
right? We need to be clear on this.
Mhm.
Right. We don't want to get it wrong. That's why we're going through massive diligence. But the truth of the matter is the public also does have a chance in November if something goes wonky to fix it, in their opinion.
Ms. Phillips, can I offer a suggestion in terms of the logistics? I think what we're looking at on April 4th is an opportunity, keeping in mind that these will be public interviews. They will be recorded and they can absolutely be shared broadly with the community. I think a well-constructed set of questions that you all will be presenting to those candidates will be very informative for anyone who may have a thought. I think to the extent that we would invite public feedback or input, I would suggest something as simple as saying the board wants our community to be aware of who's interested and who's applied. And it's important for us to know, important at all times, and this board has demonstrated this consistently time over time, is that you will accept and be open to any feedback along the way. So the process for submitting that could be as simple as a note to the board. My only caution will be that it will be important that we don't respond necessarily with anything other than a thank you, because clearly the deliberation rests with the board, and we don't want to have any appearance of any sort of undue influence that may be bubbling up in that process. The other thing I think we can easily accommodate on the 4th, both before the interviews as well as shortly thereafter, is just a very informal gathering or meet and greet, if you will. We can have some refreshments. We can have the opportunity, not only for folks that are here, but for anybody else that may have the opportunity to come in on that morning. The chance for them to interact with those candidates apart from them actually being here for the interview. And I would be careful in that interaction to use that as the basis for your decision, but just an opportunity to be transparent and be open. I think if we can construct it in that manner, and again, be very direct with our community about here's who's applied, here's who's interviewed, here's the substance of their interviews through this recording. For anybody that wants to watch and then weigh in, I think that I would imagine satisfies a lot of what you all are speaking to here, and it gives the candidates a chance to all be treated fairly in that process, so that really it's the substance of their application and the interview that you have available that will be the basis for your ultimate decision.
Great, Ms. Upchurch, does that I'm hoping that what Dr. Summers just said, do you feel like that will fulfill on the community engagement piece that you were looking for?
Yes, actually.
Okay.
That's well thought out, well planned, and well said.
Okay, thank you all. I appreciate this part of the discussion. Are there any questions regarding this timeline? I just want to close this off if we can. Mr. Clausen, do you have any thoughts or anything else with regard to the timeline or the application for applicants?
No, not on those issues. To digress for a moment, one thing that I find especially helpful is during the interview process is I prefer someone that's not actually doing the interviewing and read the questions. For me, it's very effective to actually watch the candidates, and sometimes body language and so forth speaks more than what comes from their mouth. So, you know, I think we've done that in the past. So I'll just throw that out as a potential option, and that would be my preference.
So if I understand correctly, you'd prefer someone such as Ms. Wood to read the questions and we, you know, listen and then maybe follow up with follow-up questions to that question. Is that what you're thinking?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Schwartz and Ms. Upchurch, would that be agreeable to you for the interview session?
Yes, I think he's referring to a moderator, which seems like a wonderful idea.
Yes.
Okay. And then we will formulate some interview questions. We don't have the list of interview questions ready at this time point right now, but that will be forthcoming. Any other, Mr. Schwartz, anything else with regard to the timeline or the application process?
No, but just a question of general knowledge to Ms. Upchurch's point. Are the applicant names and the associated data they submit public information? So any member of the public that has significant interest, if they can't find it themselves, we can point them to a link where they can say, we can say, please it's your representative. Feel free to review all the candidates. Good. Matt and Teresa, they're all nodding their heads in case you're not on video.
Yeah, I just don't recall what we've done in the past. I don't know why we wouldn't provide it. Dr. Summers, do you have any thoughts there?
Oh, provide the questions in advance, is that what you're asking? Mr. Clark?
Candidates, resumes, stuff.
Oh, no, we would absolutely be able to facilitate that being part of each applicant's candidacy.
I think the
Okay,
only thing
thank
I
you.
might recommend is that we wait until the application period closes to post that as a package. As somebody could withdraw.
Well, it'd only be the ones that are gonna be interviewing.
Right.
So, and then what we could set up is essentially, here is the written portion of the application, here's the interview that's conducted on the 4th. And again, there's an opportunity for our community to be able to review those materials and offer any input they may have.
And I think it goes without saying that personal information such as their references, I wouldn't want to put out there. We need that, but I wouldn't want the public to be able to reach out to their places.
Yeah, we'll be sure to redact that type of information and essentially just keep it focused on the substance of their responses to the questions that you all asked.
Okay,
And Teresa, just if I may,
Yeah.
just a reminder that all of this process is open and to the public and will be done. You can't obviously do anything behind closed doors in executive session. So the entire deliberation process and the entire process will be transparent and with integrity.
that's correct. Thank you for summarizing that. Okay, so with that, I think we have covered all aspects of this agenda item, and I'd like to move on to, first of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Chris Coulter and Stacy Baker for waiting because this was originally the item number 1. But we're gonna move to the original item B1, Proposition FF Free School Meals Update. It aligns with priorities 1 and 4. Welcome Chris Coulter and Stacy Baker, and thank you for presenting an update on district recommendations concerning participation in the Healthy School Meals for All, known as Proposition FF Free Program for the upcoming 2023-2024 school year.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today. Are we going to be able to share the presentation?
You should be able to from your screen unless you're running into an issue. One of us can.
I don't know if they have Word docs up to access it. I think they-
Well, then I'll just do it real quick because I have it right here, just to streamline and simplify.
Share. Very nice.
All right.
Okay. All right, ready to go. Ms. Baker.
Okay, thank you. So we just wanted to take some time to regroup on where we were from last time to where we are this month. As a reminder, Colorado Proposition FF is the Healthy School Meals for All. It is set to begin in the 23-24 school year for all schools that are on National School Lunch Program. So what that is as a reminder, is to provide free meals for all children who attend those schools. And in District 38, those schools include all of our elementary schools, and then Monument Academy Elementary and Monument Academy Secondary School. And the one thing we cannot do is partition those out, so it's an all or nothing for those schools. So we would have to opt into all 7 schools or none at all.
Ask you a quick question. I can't remember how it was. We brought this up a month ago. Why is it participatory for secondary schools at the academies, but not in the operating schools?
So we operate MA secondary as an NSLP school simply for the operational aspect of it, the kitchen design, the way that we can manage that kitchen and the food. We don't have the facilities out there to run it like we would the other secondaries.
Okay, so it's really facility bound, not legal, financial, something like that.
For that school, yes,
And NSLP's National School Lunch Program?
yes, yeah.
Got lucky.
So the decision-making criteria, so the results of the voting were 55 to 44.9% yes versus no. So the voters did vote for this, and the schools that choose to operate can opt into or out of the program annually. There's an application submission that has to be completed to USDA and CDE once a year. So it is something that we will have to opt into or out of annually. There's some unknowns there's a lot of unknowns we know. We don't know how many students and families will opt to use this program. We anticipate quite a few. And we don't quite know the total impact on operations, lunch schedules, menu challenges, etc. And then we have some anticipated knowns. We know that we need to increase staffing capacity, funding, support. And we do anticipate that state reimbursement will ideally be able to cover the increase in costs. But with the cost of food, supplies, and diesel going up every time we get a delivery, it seems like we hope that it will. But I do think it's important to note that the funding does come on the backside as opposed to the front side of this program. So I will submit reimbursement to the state after every month is completed.
I have a question. Refresh me, does the reimbursement submission happen every month or is it the annually?
It's every month.
Okay.
So
If I remember correctly, it's roughly a 2-week window to actually see the fund from a cash flow perspective purely, which we learned last month in our meeting is important, especially in the February, March time frame.
yeah,
It's about a 2-week window.
it can be.
From click to
When
cash.
we did free meals through COVID, there was a portion of the time where CDE did not have the funds. So it was delayed quite a bit.
And if I remember, just to ensure we're protecting the cash flow of the district for all the other things we do as well. If I remember, Mr. Ridgway last time said there were funds dedicated in an account specifically for food service, that we were in a position, for lack of a more elegant term, to float this. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, we have our own fund, and if Brett wants to add anything to that, I'll let him.
Just to validate, please.
Yes, nutrition services is in its own fund, and it does have its own cash reserves to fund that cash flow.
Any other questions on that so far?
Thanks for the clarification,
You're
everyone.
welcome. Okay, so we do know that we have some pretty significant staffing challenges and equipment we're not quite sure of yet. We do anticipate more students will participate in this. We know that we want to get a supervisor, an operations supervisor position filled, as well as we are shooting for a dietitian position to be filled in anticipation of more special diets being requested and needed. And the operations supervisor will help with the day-to-day operations. We need to hire an additional driver that we are looking at doing a 6-hour or more position. And hopefully that will actually increase the level of applicants that we get for that. And we know that we will need additional staff. Most of the staffing right now is needed at the secondaries that will not be participating in this. But because the staffing is so low at those schools, it pulls from what we need to operate at the elementaries. We know we will need a third person at Bear Creek. So I know for sure we will be putting that out in the Bear Creek newsletter, and I'm going to be posting positions for specific schools in hopes that that will draw neighborhood attendees as well. If there's someone who wants to work, but wants to know where they're gonna be or be at the school where their children go. And we do know additional equipment will be needed, but we are not 100% sure on what we'll need. We know we may need more ovens. Our kitchens are limited in size, so we can't go up in size much, but we will be looking at the capacity of the ovens and the warmers that we have. And we are currently doing that now because of the lead time we need to get equipment in. We ordered an oven, I think probably 4 months ago, and it still hasn't come in. So there's a significant lag in some of that equipment. So we are assessing that now, as well as assessing the operations of our other equipment to make sure it's up to par.
Casey, I have a question. If there's a facility that perhaps isn't using some of their equipment, is it easy to transfer it over? So say Palmer Ridge doesn't use all of their equipment, or Lewis Palmer doesn't use all their equipment. Is it possible or feasible to transfer equipment from from one building to another?
So in some level, yes, we can call on grounds and maintenance. Our box trucks a lot of times won't fit that equipment because of the height of it. The problem with moving it is if it breaks, a lot of times you can void any warranty you have on that because you moved it without the company actually doing it. So it's possible, but it would depend on the equipment. Something like a warmer, we can move easily. But something that's on the more expensive side, like an oven, we would potentially look at the company that delivered it to see if they could move it.
Thanks.
So next steps, I think today we just want to formalize the decision to opt in to this program. What we're looking at hopefully this week is completing those job postings and the salary for the supervisor and the dietitian. And then, excuse me, I'm working with the principals and on school support for this. This is going to significantly impact some of their operations such as breakfast. I've heard from some principals that they've already buffered their lunch times to allow for that. So that's a good positive swing, but I do anticipate breakfast at some of the schools to be a challenge. And again, to clarify, we only do breakfast at Bear Creek, Palmer Lake, and Lewis Palmer Elementary right now. And then as we approach the 23-24 school year, we'll be getting additional feedback. This is obviously something we're talking about at the director level statewide with CDE support. And we'll just continue to work on our plans as we get near the school year.
Any additional questions? Ms. Upchurch?
Yes, 2 questions. So just to clarify again, to restate on the top from the first slide, our secondary, which is Monument or Lewis Palmer Middle, Palmer Ridge and Lewis Palmer High School would not be included in this.
Correct.
Okay. My second question, and I guess this is more directed to Casey. When we're looking at opting in and opting out, is that a decision that should rest on the board? I was under the impression that this is a presentation of our options and how does the board wish to proceed with this? And personally, I'm in support of the presentation and what you've shown. Well, as we move forward, I would like to keep our tax dollars for our students. But I'm just curious if this is something that should be a board decision. When is it a board decision when it is not on opting in and out of programs?
We did not approach this particular decision with a belief that this was necessarily a board level decision, because at the end of the day, it really is an administrative function. in our ability to be able to provide a service. That clearly, what I come back to is the voters spoke. So even if we were to entertain whatever opting out looks like, essentially we are running toward a different course of action. And to be able to do that would certainly be an option, as we discussed last month. But based on our research, based on our understanding and assessment of the landscape of how this is being implemented across districts around the state, we would be a lone wolf in not doing what clearly, again, is the will of our voters. And so it is really that driver, as well as our operational refinement, if you will, to be able to execute on what this plan is, that from my perspective, I'll just put it in my terms as well as our teams, is that we approach this very much as an operational exercise that did not necessarily require the board to take action one way or another. It'd be very similar to how we work to staff a building with enough maintenance crew or enough grounds crew or enough, whatever, fill in the blank. And all that really falls under the purview of administration. It's really our ability to execute on that plan. And because there's really no policy change that's warranted in this or anything else that the board technically has to adopt, nothing that drives that, that's essentially the rationale for why this decision rests from an operational administrative angle.
So can I, Ms. Phillips, do you mind if I ask a follow-up question?
No, absolutely. Go ahead.
So the other school districts that are opting in and we're doing so administratively, not through their boards of education?
That's my understanding as well. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't arguing for us to opt out. I was just wanted to find out where's the role in this? Whose role is it? And making sure that we are, as a D38 system, being consistent in our roles. So, and what led to this question, honestly, was when I look at the cost that's laid out for the warmers and the equipment that right now the 85,000, 85K. That's above our signature threshold. So then I got to thinking, well, what else? Where does the decision lie? And if there's other programs we see in the state, we often will come to the board. You guys will come to the board and say, all right, Board of Education, this is our recommendation. What are your thoughts, feelings? So that's why it's a clarifying question.
Sure.
Thank you, Tiffany. In the interest of time and keeping our agenda going, I'm going to move on unless anybody else has further questions.
I have 3.5 summary statements. The 0.5 comes after South Church's well thought through question. 0.1, most importantly, is just reviewing what we went through last month. It was the board's understanding that this was a net zero financial scenario to the district. Is that correct?
I think that's our operating assumption, but I also want to make sure, and Brett or Stacy can share their perspective on this. We still don't know for sure. We believe that food service, nutritional services will be able to function self-sufficiently as it has traditionally done. But this is also represents a pretty significant change, and it's one that we're going to have to monitor very closely. So our operating assumption is yes, it will. We'll see how that plays itself out as we move forward.
So, Chief Business Officer, you concur?
Yes, I concur, and we want to manage the change towards that end as much as possible.
Right. So outside of fiscal, second summary statement, food for kids is good.
Yes.
Food is fuel.
Yes.
Fuel the brain. It's a good operational thing for us to maintain the quality of academic excellence we have and potentially enhance it. So outside of fiscal, this is a very, very good thing. Third thing, operationally, to grow your team and your capacity is a wonderful, good thing. We'd rather have the agility and the capacity to do more than be constrained and be the prevention department. We want to be the enablement department. finally, painfully last month, Tiffany, I asked a boatload of questions and then Dr. Summers very politely put me in my place and said, we're not asking you for permission. We're letting you know what we plan to do. And rightfully so, because this board should be outside of operation and into developing and engaging and making strategic things reality. So that a quality team can operate them with flawless execution. That's your roles. I think that was 3.5.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz.
Oh, 3.75. So the answer is yes, we're in,
Yes.
just to clarify.
We're in.
Yes, we are moving forward, and I'd like to
Let's
thank
sing
Ms.
silver
Baker.
word. I get it.
And I'd like to thank Ms. Baker and Mr. Coulter for the work on this over the last couple months. It's very helpful, very clear. And with that, I'd like to move on to the next agenda item, which is presenting the 2021-2022 audit report with priority alignment 5. Chief Business Officer Brett Ridgway will be presenting the district's independent financial audit conducted by Clinton Larson Allen for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2022 for the board's information. Mr. Ridgway?
Hello, Clifton Larson Allen. Just to be clear. And so this is the independent audit report. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. So in the attachment for the audit report, so you can see my screen, I'm hoping, yes.
Yes, we can see
Okay.
it.
So the audit report is 104 pages long, and in the bookmarks that I have included here, kind of am enabling people to navigate to the most important parts of the report. But the very most important part of the report is the independent auditor's report here, right here at the beginning. So this is the page that I'm starting on. And if we zoom into that, you'll see that I have highlighted the second paragraph of this independent auditor's report. All of this is very scripted, of course. There's a lot of standards that have to be followed in this. And so even the wording that's in this is very scripted and prescribed for auditing standards. But it is this second paragraph that is the key thing to look for. And that is the fact that this is an unmodified opinion, that the financial statements referred present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the school district. So in terms of the first, one of the questions that Mr. Schwartz had sent us ahead of time, which I appreciate very much, is D38 compliant. This is the clearest answer to that question, that yes, because this is an unmodified opinion, that the district is compliant.
Thank you.
A couple other things to highlight on here. We have the basic financial statements, and this presents the results of the operation in two ways. One being a full accrual basis set of financial statements that you see first, that is called the statement of net position. And the difference between this and what we typically review in fund accounting on the modified accrual basis that we do within school finance is that this recognizes the value of our capital assets, and those things are presented in the numbers that they are not presented in normally. So this is what you see in a full accrual basis on the statement of net position. It shows here for the governmental entity and the component unit, meaning the charter school, that we have a negative net position. And that is something that changed here in these last few years, once it was determined that each entity of the public whole in Colorado had to show their theoretical portion of pension liabilities. So what happens at para reflects on our books as well. And so you see this $32.4 million, and that what that is a theoretically assigning para's funding liability to District 38 on a pro rata basis. And that ends up having the effect of putting the full account, the full accrual books in a negative position for net position.
Mr. Ridgway,
Yes.
two questions on this. So I guess I'm curious philosophically why we would put theoretical things in the counting audit. Because that's countercultural. So that's thing one. Or question one. Question two is, if I can trouble you to scroll down a little bit, because I can't do it on Zoom. If we have a $32 million theoretical reserve, that puts us in a $10 million theoretical only negative, then the actual is a positive 22 million. Is that correct?
Yeah, and so so the answer to the first question is the reason that it's on here is it's required by GASB 68 in terms of accounting for pension liabilities. And it's actually more than 32 million. If you look right above here, there's another 62 million straight above this. So there are big numbers. And to me, it kind of puts this whole statement effectiveness really compromises it. But again, it's required by Governmental Accounting Standards Board. To answer your second question, I would take us to the second, the balance sheet view, which is the traditional view that we're used to seeing. And in here you can see that it's done at a little bit wider view or more detailed view because it lists individual funds and categories. And so here you can see that we have $36.5 million of positive fund balance position across all the funds in the district. So that answers your second question.
It makes it a little more confusing now because we're mixing apples and oranges. So yes, it answers it. But for obviously, this is exactly why we choose to have you summarize, because the quantity of goes in us and goes out us. And at the end of the day, if I'm understanding correctly, an audit is about compliance. And for the team's edification, it's unfortunate we actually use the word audit because audit implies something was wrong and you have to look for where the anomaly is. And really, this is simply a validation that we pay someone a good degree of money for, who's a third party who's certified and credible to validate to the state that we're compliant in how we use the taxpayers' money. Is that correct?
That's correct. There is compliance factor to it. There's also, again, that validation, exactly as you say, that the financial results that we have reported are an accurate representation and appropriately have been accounted for.
Well, thank you for being available to summarize this in a succinct manner so that we don't end up with the confusion of the goes in as the goes out as, and then the theoretical negatives, which aren't actual until the time they may be used on that particular tax year.
Very good. Thank you. And so on this page, this is again the balance sheet. So the statement of net position is a full accrual balance sheet with all of this additional information that the Government Accounting Standards Board wants us to include. This is the kind of the appropriate how we manage the business version of that balance sheet that we are used to seeing. And so you see here general funds plural in terms of the categories going across the top. Then our grant fund, our bond redemption fund, capital reserve, and then an all other category here at the far right. And going down to that bottom line where I had previously been, again, starting at the far right, $36.5 million, but you can see significant portions of that are in non-general funds. $14.9 million of it is in general funds, but having bond redemption and capital reserve and some other funds take up still the majority of that total fund balance at the end of the year.
And what, quick question?
Yes.
In the spirit of total confusion.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're welcome. What percentage of that 36 million is hard asset versus cash?
In this case, it's not hard asset pretty much at all. And so if you look straight up that column here, you'll see that we have at the very top line, we have $33 million of cash and investments plus $5 million of restricted cash. So $38 million of the $36 million is cash. There are no hard assets again on this entire schedule because we don't manage the business that way in terms of our fund accounting reporting requirements.
So then there's no depreciation associated with this either.
Not on this particular schedule, no.
Okay, and this 36 million includes funds used for operations versus a net fund balance, even though it's at the end of the year. Is that correct? Or
Yes, correct. So for instance, we were just talking about nutrition services. It would be one of these other, what we call non-major governmental funds. It would be in that number.
because, and the only reason I bring this up, Tiffany, for you and I who are not fiscal wizards, is last month we talked about a $14 million fund balance beginning and ending the year. That's really how much cash we start with. And 50 million goes in and 50 million goes out every year, almost like clockwork. The problem is it's lumpy. And right now we're using some of that big balance to cover when we have dips.
Yeah. Well,
Which is also countercultural, but that's a different issue. And so I just want to make sure that that this $36 million is not perceived by us or the public or the non-fiscal part of the staff as extra funds, because it's not. It's that 14 million that Brett showed last month is the real number. This is just a moment in time snapshot, including the 50 millions that goes in us and goes out us. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And for those of us,
Thank you,
that
Mr. Schwartz.
thank you for expanding the magnification.
All right.
Mr. Were you complete or are you still continuing on?
So just a couple other things I want to show, and again, we'll go through this at the regular meeting as well. So let me jump ahead to page 99 of the report. And this is, you talk about the compliance part of what the audit report does. These are the 6 items that were identified in last year's audit report. And so that being an audit that covered the 2020/2021 fiscal year and school year. And you probably recall that there were 6 individual findings on that report in terms of control findings. Of those 6, 4 of those were able to be mitigated completely. And you can see here under status, it says corrected. So the accounting for capital leases was corrected. The accrued payroll was corrected, et cetera, interfund. Those are corrected. A couple of them, that weren't fully corrected were the property taxes, specific ownership tax processes. Now, again, in this, the reason that this is being reflected as a comment is that the process that the district had in place didn't 100% provide the correct answer, and so the auditors had to make an adjustment to provide the final answer. So the final answer is correct in the financial statements. It just was something that the auditors had to make that their final adjustment to bring it to that correct status. And then grant accounting was also not fully corrected from the prior year. So of the 6 we corrected 4 of them. 2 of them I would say actually were largely corrected, but still just a little bit to get over to the final hump on it. And so that's the prior findings, and then behind that is the findings, is a report on the new findings, or the findings of the current fiscal year. And so there's some repeat again with grant revenue and property tax. And then there's one new one about segregation of duties, which is I would say a normal type of comment for a small operation like we have, and actually a little bit too small as we've been operating under. And so that will be a design task for me going forward. So those are probably the first highlights I would want to share in terms of the audit report, and we can talk more about it again at the regular meeting.
Mr. Schwartz?
Thank you. So as a treasurer, I'm gonna take the role Mr. Taylor would have taken if he was with us today. Well done by you and your team. We went from 6 recommendations. By the way, we were compliant then to 1.5. And in the spirit of setting the bar, we're excited to have 0 next time.
Yeah, so am I. I appreciate that. And it's part of the reason, someone might, would want to ask, why is this late? And part of that was in terms of my coming on board, in the summer and then throughout the fall, I was learning kind of where we were at and making some of those improvements that we needed to make so that we would be prepared to undergo audit. And so the beginning of the audit was delayed while we built a couple of things and reviewed some of our work to make sure that we are in a good place to get going.
But my last thought and comment, and again, wonderful job by you and your team. We're glad to have you on board to get this validation of compliance versus audit even more dialed in than it was earlier. And for our citizens, if anybody's listening or chooses to listen in later, the district is compliant. And we have 1.5 areas to continue to improve upon, which are relatively unimpactful to operations. Secondly, of then secondary but equal importance is 2 simple questions. How much do our taxpayers spend on this validation of compliance? And are we getting quality value in your professional opinion for the dollars we're spending?
An audit firm is a professional service. And so there is institutional knowledge that they are able to accumulate over the years. So there is definitely value that they provide to us, especially in a scenario like I was in and am in really still in terms of coming in new to the organization. They have some more historical knowledge than I am able to bring to it. So there is definitely value that they are contributing to this process. I would say, in another cycle maybe it would be an opportunity for us to do an RFP if we were so inclined to see what other service providers we might want to consider. But as for this point, I think they are providing a good service. The cost of the service overall, I don't have that memorized offhand, but I believe it to be somewhere around $30,000 a year for this.
Okay, and by the way, not intending to have us go through the labor of an RFP to get somebody else, just a simple question. It's your bailiwick, an area of expertise. Are they good? And are we getting a good value for our $30,000?
I would say yes, we are getting good value for our $30,000.
That's the important part for our constituents and our students and our staff.
So if I may, I agree. But there's also something that Mr. Taylor had brought up, and it may have value to add to the discussion, is that sometimes having a different set of eyes is of value instead of having the same eyes over and over again. And there's value to both. One we're using right now, they're familiar with our system, they're familiar with us. So it's an easier turnaround. There's a trusting relationship. The other side of it is, to be the devil's advocate, is having a new set of fresh eyes on it to see if there's something that another set of eyes can catch that perhaps we have not, or that the one that we use now has not. And so having that newness, that freshness has value as well in the future.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that. And again, I think once after a couple cycles and when we have more stability here on the district side, then it could be the opportunity to consider whether we change course on that service provider.
Where I was coming from was either last year or before and then we'll move on to the next side, and maybe in the spirit of Christmas. But where I was coming from was, Tiffany will remember, last year, the year before, we actually had someone from the auditing firm present, and it was a less than quality experience.
Okay.
They really struggled answering questions. ended up in a lot of jibber jabber that was very far from the crux of the question. And I was just concerned if we were getting value for the dollar. Less concerned about that at this junction. But having a clean set of ears and eyes every once in a while is always a smart thing to do, not just in this, but in other.
And if I may also add to that discussion, we've always had the third-party auditor come and do the presentation. So that we're hearing it from their eyes and their ears and their thought process, versus us reporting on their findings during the regular board meeting. And there's never been a vote. Obviously, it's a report. But to your point, sometimes they lose. But I think it is also, there is value to add in having their perspective shared with us as a third party.
Can someone, well, first of all, Ms. Upchurch, did you have a question or a request with regard, or did you just want to?
No, I guess my request would be, I was just adding to the discussion. If I had a request, it would be, is there value, or should we have the auditor, the third party, when we're discussing this at our regular board meeting, do the share out side by side with Mr. Ridgway?
Mr. Ridgway, you have quite a lot of experience in this realm. What would be your thought on that?
I think there is value to do that every once in a while. My typical pattern historically has been to do that like an every other year basis. So I would say if you did it last year, you know, and especially given the late hour of reporting this, they are moving on to other parts of their own work calendars, and so it would be very difficult for them to jump into the conversation here in March. But if you did it last year, I would suggest we wait and do it until the following year, but it is your decision.
I think maybe we frame that up for next year, Dr. Summers. To have the auditor, to consider having the auditor themselves come in on an every other year cycle, possibly, or we can have more discussion about it in the future. I can't tell from my screen if Mr. Clausen is still with us. Mr. Schwartz, is Mr. Clausen available?
He is not, but I've been
Okay.
attempting to IM him all the highlights.
Do you know, okay, does he have any questions regarding the audit is my concern.
He has not responded to my text.
Okay. Okay, so with that, Mr. Ridgway, I would like to move on.
Okay.
The agenda to the updated budget assumptions in alignment with, well, priorities 1 through 6. So that you can give us the latest on the budget high level presentation there.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And so on the budget package here, again, we started our conversation in our last meeting, our last regular meeting, about these two key starting points being student count. What is the projection for funded student count for October count next year? And then what is the per pupil revenue rate? And I had indicated at that meeting that I had just heard about an improvement to the per pupil revenue rate. And so I have that included into this package as one thing. And we also made a slight adjustment to the funded pupil count assumption. It's very small actually, but the net improvement growth of the district now is going to show 46 students, 69 of those at Monument Academy and a -23 in the operated schools. That's changed just slightly from the last presentation, which is a 54 increase. The Monument Academy number had stayed the same. And what we did was adjust one particular piece of the operated school projection. So it shows a little bit of a smaller or a little bit smaller increase than what I'd shown previously. I'd shown this page previously, and I guess I just wanted to bring it to the attention again and maybe explain it a little bit better than what I had that first time. What I'm doing with this page is starting with our current year's October count, the 2022-23 actual result of October count by grade level, by school, and doing a roll forward of that projection into next year. The way that I did that roll forward was by measuring how each grade had matriculated from year to year in their own history across their educational experience. So this year we have this highlighted section at the very top is the class of 2023, and where we have 574 seniors this year. And you can see as you go back over time where they were at in their school experience, going back all the way to the time that they were in preschool in 2009. And so looking at those observed patterns, those observed matriculation patterns, not only of this current high school senior class, but prior years, and then also projecting how the future years are going to be have been matriculating so far, gives us this ability to statistically derive what I call a roll forward pattern. And that's what I show at the top of the second page was the calculated growth, the roll forward pattern for grades going across the levels of the schools. And what we end up seeing is that there's a consistent growth, that students move in, families move in, students choice in to our district more and more as the years go by into their grade levels, pretty much until we get to the high school, and high school is where it kind of plateaus. And so if we look again at the highlighted section here, this is the class of 2023. You can see that their own pattern for high school was 1.0, 1.0, 1.05, and then a 0.97. It shows that they were really kind of plateaued and really stayed consistent through their 4 years of high school in terms of the numbers of students we had in that class. And so using these roll rates for not only for this current graduating class, but again, older classes and what is happening so far in classes that are coming up for graduation in the future, allows us to come up with these average roll rate numbers in here that we can apply to our 22-23 current place and come up with a specific projection for 23-24. Now that's just a mathematical starting point for the conversation. Then the next part of that conversation is to go through this information with the principals in particular and say, you guys are the ones that are here close to this information. How does this make sense to you? Is there any adjustments you want to make? And so there was one particular adjustment that we made at the Bear Creek second grade level between last month's iteration and this month's iteration. So this is a number that came down slightly to come up with our current projection of student count that we will build our budget assumptions on for this 23-24 budget. Let me stop there and make sure, is there questions or anything that you'd like me to emphasize more or differently in that?
A couple of questions, if I may.
Okay.
If you can scroll just a teeny bit down, please. As you might imagine, we all looked at the projected PPOR number. I know that shocks you. And I know you highlighted it to make us ask us to look at it. So well done, well played. That's a significant delta versus this fiscal year, roughly 22.5% per pupil. And so my question is, are these dynamics similar given the competitive nature of our scenario of paying our staff? Is this scenario you've laid out similar in our competitive school districts?
So yes, thank you for that question. And let me skip ahead to this next slide, which I think is a better way to introduce that rate variance component that you're speaking to. And so this $9,800 number that I had highlighted on the previous page right here is jumping off of a current level of $9,000. So that is an 8% change in the per pupil revenue rate. And this is the number that I had indicated last month was going to go up a little bit. Last month, I was showing you a number that was more like 5%, but based on listening to the JBC conversations, I was projecting that it will go up to 8%. To your question of, are other school districts experiencing the same thing? The answer is yes. So they are going to be receiving similar rate variance increases. And so every school district, including us, will be trying to translate as much of that as we can into compensation change.
Okay, and there, I guess I'm confused on, or I just want to normalize the $800 or $727 difference from 9,073 to 9,800, which you have above. Because that's a significant, right? That's another 9%.
Yes.
And so how do we, so, and bear with me a sec. So where I went thinking on this really quick, and I apologize, I should have done a much better job articulating it. We're at 8,000 now, right? We're at 8,000 now. And you are this year.
A little bit more, but yeah.
We're at 9,073. That 9,073 I'm showing is the actual number for this year.
Actually, this year.
I thought we were at 8,000. What changed? We originally did our math. We were at 8,000 then.
I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know where the 8,000 starting point.
So we're moving from 9 to 9,800.
Yes.
And there's your 8%.
Yes.
Okay, my apologies then for the wild goose chase. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, keep going. Thank you.
Okay, so that's the 8% variable change here. And you see the second highlight here is the 46 increase the student count. But on the far right, you can see again that breaks down to a -23 on the operated schools and a +69 for Monument Academy. Focusing on the operated schools, then straight down below there, you can see the total change in the School Finance Act funding of $3.6 million highlighted in blue there. And the two different shades of blue above there indicate what is the rate variance change, means what comes from that 8% is $3.8 million. And then the slightly negative, pretty much near zero change is related to the volume change of student count. So that's the new money that again we would expect coming into the system, and want to then project how are we going to use that new money going forward in 23-24. And so that's why I come onto this schedule where I show the total change in School Finance Act revenue of $3.6 million. That's the same $3.6 million number that was on that prior page, 3.616. And starting to break down how much of that money comes from that change in the rate and how much of that money comes from the change in the volume, meaning the student count, and translate those directly from those revenue change observations into a projected expense change strategy. So the $3.6 million is $3.8 million of positive rate variance and $225,000 of negative volume variance. What I'm also introducing in this version of the analysis is this increased investment in capital that we have talked about in the prior months, I should say, plural, where we have this year invested $2 million in capital needs, and that we would increase that investment. The request was to increase that investment to $3 million a year. And so that's why an additional $1 million is being shown right here for the maintenance of capital needs. What that does is that is an investment of new money. So it takes that $3.6 million of new money, pulls off $1 million of it, as well as some assumed increase for property and liability insurance rate increases, and gets to us to this net new money assumption of $2.6 million. That $2.6 million would be then applied to personnel and implementation costs. Sorry, did I hear a question?
No, but they're cooking.
Questions are cooking? All right.
Yes, sir.
All right. So
boiling over shortly, but keep going.
Okay. So again, the point of this exercise is to identify how much money from the new money would we be able to identify to apply towards compensation changes going forward. And so the new money, again, is focused on that rate improvement, that per pupil revenue rate improvement, which was the 8% number. How much of that 8% number can be translated into changes in compensation? And so the shortcut of this is following this yellow highlight around the circle here, comes back to this 6.3% number that says, that I would say, hey, if we are able to apply new money changes in the patterns that being presented here, then the 8% change in revenue would result in a 6.3% change in compensation. Average across the district, not average across the board. Not everyone would see a 6.3% change. Some will be higher, some will be lower, but that would be the average across the district amount. Now, of course, the challenge that we are undertaking is to find other pieces of the budget that we might be able to retask or reallocate, reprioritize towards compensation changes. And so we're looking for volume changes. We're looking for implementation cost opportunities that we can increase this number by. And that is the challenge for myself, between now and the team, between now and our March 15th meeting, when we want to present draft pay schedules, is how much additional might we be able to apply to this?
So first question boiling over from the pot is, if there were zero capital improvement, theoretically only, since in the audit they were able to put in theoretical numbers, why can't we?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, not the audit, the compliance validation. There was nothing wrong with our finances. The audit. If we move that $1 million back in strictly into pay, what percent increase on average would it represent for the 2014?
And so that's why over here in this far right-hand table, in this upper right-hand portion of this particular page, why I present both scenarios that would be above and below the presented scenario. And so what you would think with that $1 million, if that $1 million increase was to go away right here, then that would increase the availability of funds here by $1 million. And so it would just push all the way through. You'd be $1 million, $1 million. So you'd end up saying, hey, instead of 2.5, we could invest as much as 3.5 down here. So we could go from 6.3 to 8.8. That would be the theoretical change there.
Okay, so the delta is roughly a third, right? 2% on a little over 6.
Yeah.
So if I'm getting an extra $10 a week, it goes to 13, roughly, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that's the mental gymnastic here. Okay, great. So we'll look forward to March 15th. You'd answered almost every question I had, which is where can we innovate on a capital versus a recurring basis to eat into that $1 million. That's very necessary, right? And
yeah,
I believe the board understands well that if we don't maintain the quantity of facilities, the quality of the product we produce goes down. And the farther we kick the can down the road, the more expensive the fix becomes.
Exactly. And that's why to present it here as an option, and then we'll continue to provide options for this conversation as we go forward.
Well, this is one of those times where it's wonderful to have a high quality team, because I'm quite confident that you'll come up with some wonderful options.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Challenge
Any
accepted.
other? Yeah.
Challenge accepted, sir.
Oh, yeah.
Good.
Ms. Upchurch, do you have anything?
I would just add to, as a reminder to keep in the back of our minds, that increase is statewide. So that's still, I am glad you're accepting that challenge, and I look forward to seeing what you come up with. But I also want to caution and remind folks that that's across the state, and it may not get us closer to our competitors.
Agreed. Appreciate that notation, because that is something we do have to keep in mind.
And Mr. Ridgway, I would just add that I really appreciate the granular look at our revenue change based on the School Finance Act and our enrollment. It's really, really helpful the way that you've laid it out, and have improved this over the last few weeks. So thank you. It's very clear, and we'll keep asking questions. So.
Sounds great. I appreciate it. Thank you.
We can, I am seeing everybody on the screen. I'm not seeing any other questions being raised or thoughts. So I'd like to move on to the next agenda item, which I believe is Dr. Summers. Review of the student, or not student, superintendent evaluation process. Dr. Summers.
Well, your superintendent continues to be a student, so I will be a lifelong learner. How's that? And there's nothing really to present here, but just wanted to plant the seed and remind you all, and I will get to you later this afternoon the self-evaluation input, very similar to what we did last year. And then Vicki will send the form to you all that allows you to input your individual responses or ratings. And what we're targeting is by March 17th, that's a Friday, ahead of our board meeting on the 20th. If you can just have those responses put in, we'll make sure to have a copy of all those responses that can feed into our executive session time that is able to go into more of those details. And then I know there'll probably be a period of time before there's a one-page sort of summary that becomes the meat and substance of what is made public as far as that process goes. So this was really just a plug for that, and appreciate your time in that and feedback that will be very informative for me and continue to move us forward.
Super. Thanks for briefing us on that and the March 17th target date. And we'll move on, which is also your agenda item. Well, in part, B6, previewing the March 20th board meeting agenda.
Yes, so two things, and I'm just going to share, bear with me here, the draft of next month's agenda. And then what I'd like to do is actually tee up Amber to just share with you a couple of edits based on the feedback that was given on the draft calendar. So that you can see the most updated and recent version of that. So we're still fleshing out some recognition for the meeting. So we'll make sure to have that fine-tuned. We do have as our first discussion / action item the final approval for the 23-24 and then preliminary 24-25 district calendars. We will have a panel of different representatives who have been hard at work in the development of the Portrait of a Graduate Educator update as item C2. We do have, as traditional, our financial planning and analysis, as well as an opportunity for any additional audit reports, comments, questions, etc. That takes us to our preview of the 23-24 pay schedules and a budget planning update, which Brett has done a nice job of teeing up for us as well. And then I don't, at least at this point, see anything on consent that will necessarily require us to move it off. But if there's anything that you all are identifying ahead of that meeting or during the meeting, we're happy to dive into more of that detail. Anything I can respond to right now as far as questions or any other adds that may need to be made to that agenda?
I have a thought.
Great.
In the spirit of us as a board attempting to be innovative and set the bar for our peers around the state and other places, I'd like to recommend that once a quarter, the staff come to us with things they would like to see the board do. once a quarter, I'd like to recommend that it not be Dr. Summers, but you rotate from your staff. We're not there every day, and you are. And ultimately, we were elected by the community to ensure that the kids are successful. Because they're the future of our country. And if we're not innovating to do that as a team, we're not colluding to make sure that happens, and we're not doing our job. And I want to challenge you to come to us with things that you would like to see us achieve. And we will challenge back and ask for why. I just don't think we can come up with all the good ideas.
I mean, speak for yourself.
Right, I don't think Tiffany can come up with all the good ideas.
Mr. Schwartz, are you proposing, I just want to get a little more specific if you can. Once a quarter that someone on Dr. Summers' team comes to us during a work session, or we add it as a work session agenda item of some sort?
Yeah, and they come to us and say, you know, I've been working in my particular field, Ms. Wedstein's area of control, and we could use the board's thought and help in these two areas.
I understand the request. I'm wondering, Dr. Summers and team members, can you speak to that and how I'd like to hear some responses as to your.
Well, I don't want to steal any potential response that may also come from our team that's sitting here right now, but a couple of things that are coming to mind, and what I appreciate is that actually just what came to my mind was a little bit of the same process that we're utilizing for my own evaluation, which is that, and we build into each agenda an opportunity for board self-reflection, and then that self-reflection as it's processed or thought about can very much set a stage for, and I think just to paraphrase what I'm hearing from Mr. Schwartz, the board is wanting to know where are there opportunities to innovate and to improve, and to hear from the folks that are as close to the work as possible. Could certainly involve folks from our team here. It could also potentially involve various individuals that work in our schools. So our principals came to my mind, teachers come to mind. Obviously, we won't fill the room with hundreds of folks all at once, but I think there may be an element of synthesis or open feedback that not only supports what you're after, but it also helps create a good model for all of us in the system to think about ways that we can continuously reflect and then be able to utilize that feedback as it's coming in, as I'll use the term feed forward, right? It's how do we incorporate that, and then how do we apply it? So, but I also reserve time here for anybody else on the team that may have any other initial reactions.
I have a thought, and I'm going back historically a little bit. There was a time when we would annually do a department update, and I don't recall doing that recently. You know, I think we got distracted by a lot of other really important things. And I think embedded in that could be the opportunity for us departmentally to share with you what we're working on, what we're struggling with, and what our hopes and visions are. So we could embed that. So specifically for me, I could talk about some discipline statistics and how that compares to historically where we've been. I could talk about some special education statistics, English language learners. We could even pull out some progress data and demonstrate growth or lack thereof, and then engage in the conversation at that level. I think would be really helpful.
I agree, and I believe it was last fall that we did do priority updates. But I'd suggest we move more towards department updates because there's so much overlap in the priorities. So when I think about the work our teams are doing, they really spread across many various priorities. And so I think that'd be a great opportunity to share some of the work that's being done by our teams. And then I'm thinking about the work we did on Portrait of a Graduate and that engagement and input. So as we approach new innovations like that, just it's a good reminder to us to include the board in developing those types of initiatives.
I want to make sure I'm still getting to the spirit of what I heard from Mr. Schwartz, though. I think he would concur that information is extremely important. Slap me or throw something if I'm off on this. You are also very much wanting to know what can the board do, not what are we doing and here's everything that that we can share.
We value the report of the news. I'm asking you to give us places we can help make the news.
And that could be a common thread in terms of what essential components are built into any of those.
My goal is to take what we're doing to a new level.
We appreciate that feedback.
And continue. We have such academic excellence here. We need to continue to innovate through it to make sure it continues to maintain and get better. And the 4 and eventually 5 of us don't have all the intellectual capacity to do it. And you guys do it every day and we don't. So I'd like you to challenge us. We'll challenge you back. And we'll all get better through it.
Maybe that's an appropriate term for that type of interaction, is challenges and the opportunities that
We do it as a respectful team.
absolutely. So I did want to, with a couple of minutes still left, Ms. Phillips, allow Ms. Wettstein to just speak to what the most recent draft calendar is based on feedback from the last board meeting. So I think it's pulled up on the screen. Amber, if you have a opportunity to, I'm sharing it right now.
Okay. So I wanted to point out that since our last discussion, I was able to meet with each of the secondary principals and look creatively at their current bell schedules. And what we discovered through that process was that students are currently accessing the buildings sooner than the first period of the day. And so in meeting with transportation and assuring that all students would have access earlier than what we are currently getting credit for in our instructional time, we are suggesting moving back towards a last day of school, May 17th, instead of marking that as a tentative day by recapturing time within the current bell schedule. So essentially, we will have an access period, which is what the schools already do, where students can check in with their teachers, get additional assistance when needed. We just need to verify that all buses arrive by the start of that access period, which we have done. So we feel confident in this change, moving back to our traditional last day of school versus a tentative last day. Happy to answer the questions that you have.
So there's been a lot of discussion around this, and in the event that we have too many snow days, we are still covered with that.
We feel confident that we have plenty of time offered it now.
Thank you for taking that. There was a lot of feedback in that.
We just want to make sure you had a quick chance to see that ahead of the March 20th meeting. So any other questions on the calendar or any other items for March?
I have a question that since we're in a work session,
Yep.
Tossing around ideas, we're always looking at our graduation dates. And I know there's always unintended consequences of where our graduation falls in terms of our secondary and our elementary staff. When we're looking at these calendars, not necessarily next year, but future thinking, I have no idea, is there feasibility that graduation we can have? So I'm looking at this date and I see the last day for students is the 17th.
last day for our teachers is the 22nd. Is it feasible to do a graduation on a weekday where the teachers are in, but the students have already left the building? So for example, elementary, our elementary teachers often have to make choices between attending graduation or attending the last day with their students, and that also applies to families. And so we've changed that this year so that that's why graduation is on a Saturday. Well, then the unintended consequences now, secondary staff are attending graduation on a Saturday. So if all students are no longer in school on, say, Friday, from elementary all the way up, but staff is, then staff would be able to use a work day at graduation, and it wouldn't interfere with having to have them work on a Saturday. It wouldn't interfere with having to make those tough choices between graduations and their students. This is just me, it's a work session, so I'm throwing it out there as a brainstorming thought process
If you're asking if it's feasible, yes, it's feasible.
in the future.
Yes,
Just like I said, just throwing it out there.
okay. I don't know any other way to respond to it right now. Okay,
I was just throwing
yeah,
it out there.
as an idea.
Yeah.
Okay, fair.
Okay, with that, we will move on to board member reflections. I'm going to start with Mr. Schwartz, and then we'll go to Ms. Upchurch, and then myself. Mr. Schwartz,
I think I have none today. Thank you.
thank you for your other additions to the meeting. Ms. Upchurch.
I actually want to share a reminder that the Aliorum Day Award Ceremony is Wednesday, the 26th of April. And I always want to encourage our board members and our community to attend and celebrate our community members and our stakeholders that go above and beyond for our exceptional students. So it's an invitation, please attend the Aliorum Day Awards. And then my second reflection, I have three, is at the Chamber of Commerce event, our luncheon, which Dr. Summers and Mr. Belcher were there, and appreciate that. There was a really good presentation on leadership, and I'd like to get my hands on some of those leadership resources for my fellow board members. So I don't know if there's a way that we can reach out and get some copies of that. And then my third reflection is thank you so much for arranging for our staff and some of our district stakeholders who wanted to attend to be at the Capitol and advocate on behalf of D38. I thought it was productive. Some of the feedback was we don't see teachers in groups at the Capitol very often, so kudos to D38 for doing that and speaking up for ourselves and advocating. And I would love, if possible, to see more of those. But thank you for arranging that, and thank you for putting that together. To Mr. Ridgway as well was there, and I thought it was also a good bonding and team building experience as well. So I just wanted to say thank you, and that's all I have. And thank you, Ms. Phillips, for being there as well.
Thanks, Ms. Upchurch. As far as board member reflections go, I just want to acknowledge again that we are currently a temporary board of 4 members. And I, and as well as my peers, remain very intent on moving forward with the district business at hand. And hopefully, working in perfect parallel, if you will, in terms of pace and continuity for the district. I know that can be a little bit of a change when we're down a person. So we will, as fluidly as we can, move forward with appointing a new person on the board. I look forward to that process as well as the outcome. And I want to thank my fellow board members for it takes extra effort and energy and time to do this process, but obviously it's extraordinarily important for our stakeholders, our community, and ultimately our students. So thank you in advance for the extra time and effort that takes. And I also appreciate some really excellent communication that we've all had the last 10 days. It's very helpful to me as an interim person in the presidential role. So thank you for that. And that concludes my board reflections. And with that, I will adjourn this work session. Oh, wait, I was just going to say, unless there are any other concerns or thoughts. So Tiffany, go ahead.
I wanted to share our appreciation for Ms. Manchester and the work you've done since you've come on board. Just your energy and your can-do and your ideas has been an asset, and you will be missed. I'll miss being here.
With that, I will adjourn this work session. Thank you, everybody, for your time. And we will see you at the March 20th Board of Education meeting for D38.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Mr. Belcher, I'll leave it up to you to close it.
That was quick.
That was quick. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.